No, I'm not going to switch to Windows. No, I'm definitely not I'm not switching to I'm not switching to Windows. This isn't a sorry. Start again. This isn't a Mac versus Windows video because one, they're inherently boring, and two, who cares? If you want to argue about that in the comments, go for it. In fact, please do because the algorithm loves it. Instead, I want to help you pick between the brand new Huawei MateBook 14 and the MacBook Air. Because if you found this video, I'm guessing that you're trying to make that decision. And equally, if you need a new laptop and you sit in this kind of Netherland between macOS and Windows, and you don't really have an allegiance to either of them, both of these machines should be on your list. But first, a very quick word from today's sponsor. If you're anything like me, you've probably got countless browser tabs and apps open all day long, and it gets a bit annoying. The good news is Shift is designed to help Mac users get out of that problem, and it does this by merging all of your apps and browser tabs into one powerful window, which streamlines everything you do online. That means everything: communication, scheduling, YouTube, education, and all the stuff you need to work and play online is dealt with. Inside Shift, you get over 1,500 integrated apps, which is bonkers, the ability to search across all of your accounts, apps, and files via one integrated search, calendar sync, which is useful if you have multiple calendars and want a single unified view, fully customizable bookmark manager, customized notification settings for scheduling quiet hours, muting alerts, or showing and hiding unread badges for focused browsing. Trust me, when you really need to hone in and focus on something, that makes a massive difference. The ability to manage all of your email accounts, including Gmail, Outlook, and Office 365 from one centralized window. And if you're anything like me and you have loads of different email accounts, this is a godsend. And workspaces to keep everything organized. If you value convenience, efficiency, time, and your own sanity, which I really do, I highly recommend Shift. It's just so organized and intuitive. It brings everything in your digital world together, and I reckon you'll quickly realize that you can't live without it. I've got a sneaking suspicion that Shift could become one of those essential apps that you install on every new Mac. To find out more, click that link in the description. And thank you once again to Shift for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's talk about the MateBook 14 specs and pricing. It runs the Intel Core Ultra 7 processor with 16 gig of RAM, and it has 1 terabyte of storage. And that is the spec. There's no other choice. You can't choose 8 gig of memory. You can't go for 512 gig of storage or boost it to 2 terabytes. That's what you get, but that's quite refreshing, and I think Huawei have picked a spec which is, it's just considerate. It's the sort of spec that most people will go for. There's 19 hours of battery life on offer based on 1080p video playback. It has an AI camera and AI sound and fingerprint recognition. The touch display is a 2.8K OLED unit with a 120Hz refresh rate and compatibility with the 3rd generation M Pencil. Powering everything is Windows 11 Home, and it comes in this rather fetching green colour. The price, £1,099 in the UK, and you can order it today. Let's talk about the design of the MateBook 14 because it is one of my favourite aspects of this laptop. It weighs 1.31 kilograms, which is basically in between the 15-inch MacBook Air, which is heavier, and the 13-inch MacBook Air, which is lighter. So it kind of sits nicely in the middle when it comes to how hefty it is, and hefty is definitely a relative term here. These are all very light laptops. The MateBook 14 is thicker because it's wedge shaped, and the reason that's quite nice is because I'm a massive fan of the old wedge shaped MacBook Air. I do miss it. I miss it big time. So whenever we get a laptop that has that kind of old MacBook Air aesthetic, I'm immediately a big fan. But overall, it feels lovely, and I'm a big fan of this green colour. Apologies if this doesn't come off brilliantly on here, but it's just this lovely kind of gentle, relaxed, very modern hue, which looks professional, it looks upmarket, and it's really, really eye-catching. I've used this in all sorts of places like, you know, coffee shops and while out travelling. No one buys a laptop to get looked at, although there are some MacBook owners that might do that. Most people don't. Most people buy their laptop just to use it, but it's quite nice when, you know, you're sitting there tapping away and clearly that guy over there is eyeing up your laptop. I think bearing in mind you're spending over £1,000 on this, it needs two things. It needs the desirability factor, which it definitely has, and secondly, it needs to be well put together, and it feels just as taut and not unbreakable. Obviously, this isn't a rugged laptop, but it does feel nice and premium, just like the MacBook Air. And that's very high praise. The MacBook Air does feel a little bit more premium just based on the materials. It's also more expensive. The only downside is something that I can demonstrate. So with a MacBook Air, you can do this. Brilliant. You can normally do this. One-handed or one-thumbed opening of the display. On the MateBook 14, it doesn't quite work. You have to put that hand there. That is a tiny gripe, but it's just the one thing that lets the design down slightly. However, things are pulled back massively when it comes to this. The display on the MateBook 14 is astounding. So it measures 14.2 inches diagonally and it has a 91% screen to body ratio, which means the bezels are pretty thin. They are at their thinnest on the sides here. The top bezel is a little bit thicker, but in fact that's turned off. Brilliant. It doesn't have a monkey island. Oh, hang on, it's not called the dynamic island, is it? That's the iPhone mark. Just to put some context around this video, I flew back from Taipei yesterday and I'm very jet lagged. Basically, the display on the MateBook 14 it's lovely. It's compatible with sRGB, P3 and Adobe RGB, and it has a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. And if you combine all of that stuff with the fact that this is an OLED panel, the blacks are nice and rich, the colors are vibrant, it's just a beautiful thing, and you don't get this on the MacBook Air. And this has a 120Hz refresh rate, which means it's very smooth, very speedy, and again, you don't get that on the MacBook Air. That still has a 60Hz panel. It's also touch enabled, which is a good thing, I think personally. Windows it's a lot of things, but it's very well designed for touch. Whenever I review a Windows laptop, and inevitably it has a touchscreen, when I go back to my Mac, I miss it. It's even compatible with Huawei's 3rd generation M Pencil, which isn't something I'd use personally. It's another option. And again, you can't use the Apple Pencil on the MacBook Air. I don't think you'd want to, personally, but it's just a nice differentiator. We even get eye protection tech built into this laptop, just like Huawei's smartphones, and that's thanks to 1920Hz high-frequency dimming and the reduction of blue light. Now, that's not something you'll spot every day, but it's just nice to know it's there. When it comes to performance, just the usual caveat here, which is that I don't do benchmarks. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how this performs compared to the MacBook Air in a benchmark, because I don't care. Basically, the regular stuff that you need to do for work and life. When it comes to that, the laptop just needs to be smooth. It needs to be responsive. It needs to be quick doing all of that stuff. And the good news is the MateBook 14 is incredibly quick. And that's thanks to, firstly, that Intel processor, and secondly, that 120Hz display. It also features something called Super Turbo, which basically promises, how do you turn Windows off? Basically promises to get you to the Huawei logo in 1 second. And it lives up to that claim, although I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's just the logo, who cares? However, what is impressive is how quickly it gets into Windows after the logo. Done. But now we need to think about who is this for and who is this for. Let's start with the MateBook 14, and yes, you can buy cheaper Windows laptops, but in my experience, they're just a bit rubbish. This delivers exactly what you expect for just over £1,000 and possibly a little bit more. The only thing that lets the MateBook 14 down slightly is the connectivity, because it's both good and frustrating. Firstly, you get loads of options. So you get USB-A ×2, you get HDMI, both of which you do not get on the MacBook Air. You get a headphone jack, obviously, and you get USB-C, but you only get one USB-C port. And that's frustrating because that's how you charge the laptop as well. So if you're charging your MateBook 14, you can't use the USB-C port. And on the MacBook Air, you get 2 USB-C ports and MagSafe. And that brings me onto the MacBook Air. This bit's quite straightforward, because if you are a Mac person and you need a new MacBook Air and you're just watching this video to see what's happening on the other side of the fence, then you're going to buy this anyway. Whatever positive things I've said about the MateBook 14 in this video do not matter, because this is your default choice. And hands up, macOS is a default choice for me as well. I can't go back to Windows. I cannot do it. Even though this is a lovely laptop, macOS is where it's at for me. However, if you do sit in that kind of Netherland between Windows and macOS, the reason you'd go for this, I think, is if you need more storage, so you can add more storage to the MacBook Air. And secondly, why else would you go for this? Connectivity, I suppose. The connectivity on the MacBook Air is better than it's more convenient. Is it more convenient? This is really hard. Okay, you get 2 USB-C ports on this and MagSafe, which means it's a little bit more ready for modern connectivity compared to the MateBook 14. Although the MateBook 14 has HDMI out, which is nice. But that said, the battery life on both of these laptops it's very comparable. 19 hours is based on video playback, 1080p video playback, so you can take that with a pinch of salt. But in my testing, the MateBook 14 is just as all-day usable as the MacBook Air. Charging it is less of an issue, which kind of means that the port situation on the MateBook 14 is a bit better than this. Ooh, the other thing, I suppose, is the fact that you get more colour choices with the MacBook Air, and you do get 2 different screen sizes, so you get a 13-inch version and a 15-inch version. I think, and this is fairly ironic given how I opened this video, it does come down to the operating system. So if you're in that Netherland between Windows and macOS, there's going to be something about one of these operating systems that really works for you. So it might be app compatibility. There might be certain apps on macOS that work for you. So for me, Ulysses is a writing app which, I'm sorry, but I cannot find a Windows alternative for Ulysses. It just doesn't seem to exist. If you know of one, let me know in the comments. So my advice is to get your hands on, if you haven't done already, get your hands on macOS and Windows and try and work out which one is best for you. But my final thoughts on the MateBook 14 are, apart from that one-handed opening, it's a lovely laptop. I think it justifies its price very well indeed. I think it fights very hard for attention against the MacBook Air. The display it's probably the winning part of this laptop. The fact I'm not switching to Windows is not the fault of this laptop. It's because I have that allegiance to macOS. For everyone else who doesn't have that allegiance, please check this out. However, if you still need some more details on the MacBook Air, firstly, subscribe to this channel because I talk about this laptop all the time. Secondly, keep watching for my full M3 15-inch MacBook Air review.